What compelled me to buy them, mail them to a father who would not mail one back, despite the short span between my birthday, his? Why did I read those rhymed verses so carefully, trying to find the blandest good wishes among the pale envelopes, the flimsy cards with their scenes of fishing boats and mallard ducks designed to make the eyes of even the most callous father mist over in reverie? At the end, my father's eyes were dim from diabetes, the heavy stone of a magnifying glass by his bedside in the house he'd made his daughters too frightened to come home to. I sent those cards more for myself than for him, hoping to provoke something better than anger or silence. After his death, we found the cards secreted away, and I bound them with a rubber band, wanted to offer them as proof of love to every funeral home doubter, fanning them out in my hands. I read my own handwriting beneath the series of postmarks as if it were not mine, but the scrawl of some stranger writing the name of someone she never met. When I turned them over, I saw why he'd kept them. He'd written rows and rows of lottery numbers in a hand so beautiful and delicate, I could almost forget their mathematics of addiction. Promise of payoff so tempting, my father kept straining his vision to pick the winning numbers long after the damage any windfall could repair. And there's two ways in which I know I am my father's daughter. One is he was and I am incredibly vain about our handwriting. If you get one of my books and I sign it for you, prettiest writer handwriting in America. My students, they get back poems from me and they're like, I can read her handwriting. So gorgeous. And my father had absolutely gorgeous handwriting. And both of us, he was a problem gambler, and I could very easily be one, particularly in Illinois. Does anyone in here from Illinois knows now that there are slot machines everywhere? There are slot machines in restaurants, in bars. My local bakery has slot machines. I could go roll into Larry's House of Cakes, get myself one of those killer cookies, and sit there playing Lotus Flower all day long. Just eating a cookie. So that's a vulnerability I know that I have too. So I want to read this poem because it was one that folks had on a handout, but I also want to tell a little story about it. I did go to a liberal arts college, much like Ripon, Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. And the only time my father ever saw it was when dropped me off and picked me up, actually for my graduation. And Kenyon was all male for a long time and all white for a long time. And my father had a way of saying things. He was not a poet. He was not necessarily a literary man, but he had a way of saying things that sort of cut to the quick of the issue. So this is what he said to me on my graduation day. And the only thing you need to know is that there was an American poet and critic called John Crow Ransom. His name was John Crow Ransom, and he was very influential. So there's a prize in his name at Kenyon. Graduation day, Kenyon College, 1988. How they give a little black girl like you a Jim Crow Ransom prize? My father asked that graduation day. The senior class milled happily, not sure yet what to do, degrees in hand. My father never knew who John Crow Ransom was. Still, he unmasked the whiteness of that place, its storied past, replete with narrow-minded people who, He thought he'd wisely taught me to despise. Now I had claimed a place among them all, the very whites he'd tried to demonize for years. My newly earned degree felt small and insignificant. He thought my prize did nothing more than signal my shortfall. This poem comes from a series of poems in this book that are written as sonnets. They're 14 lines. They scan, they rhyme, the whole Shamil, the whole full sonnet. They went full sonnet because I needed that form to. It was like literary Spanx. I needed it to hold all those emotions in. Like when you're trying to write about such tough material, things are just pouring out of you, and you need something, some sort of astringent to sort of loose everything, pull everything in that wants to get loose. And one thing I didn't realize about my father was he was chronically depressed. But nobody called it that. But I have these memories of being a small child with him, and while other fathers were out at work, I'm watching Tom and Jerry with him. It's like, that's not, as an adult, I figured out, that's not right. Why is he home? And he did a lot of sales jobs throughout his life, even though when my mother and father met in England, they were both training for professions. My mother was training to be a nurse, which she did her entire life, and my father was training to be an electrician, which I have no memory of him ever actually being. And when you are someone who's trying to sell people things all the time, depression just comes with the territory. So I was thinking about this. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're going to do it very well, and there were periods where he did very well, and then there were periods where things sucked. So I thought about, why am I watching Tom and Jerry with him? Parade of cartoon stars. I watch a cartoon cat pursue a mouse. Remember how you'd grin at their hijinks. Your cackle would resound throughout the house, such pleasure in their animated tricks of booby traps or guns or powder kegs. You'd sing the Jetsons theme or the Flintstones or laugh at Olive Oil, her scrawny legs. I didn't think it weird to find you home, amused by Jerry Mouse and Tom the Cat, Quick Draw McGraw, and Huckleberry Hound. Not wondering where other dads were at, but knowing mine preferred to stay homebound. Those cartoon characters were all that moved, at least until the sales climate improved. So I'm going to read one more from this series, and then move on to happier poems. What I didn't know until after my father's death, or wasn't really highly aware of, was that he had a brother. It's like news to me. He had a half-brother. They had the same father, different mothers. So this is my first phone call with that uncle, who turned out, interestingly enough, to be diametrically opposite to my father. Where my father was dark, this man was light. First phone call with my uncle. His voice sounds like my dad's, but less intense. Familiar island accent without strain. I listened as he patiently explains. My dad and he were brothers in the sense they shared a common father, not a home. My grandfather neglected both his sons. Responsibilities he chose to shun. A world beyond that island he could claim. When last I saw my uncle, I was 2. My sister 8. We couldn't say we'd met this rival Father wanted to forget. You can't keep bitterness inside of you, my uncle says. You can't hold on to it. A notion my father never would admit. So after I wrote that book of, elegies and sad stuff and more sad stuff, I needed to write fun stuff. I needed to write things that would at least entertain me or amuse me. And I've gotten really interested lately in the form of the ode. Not necessarily the classical ode, but more on the lines of Pablo Neruda, who, if you know anything about him, the man would write an ode about anything. Ode to an onion, ode to a sock, ode to everything. I have all these different translations now, and it's like ode to freaking everything. Which actually sounds like a really good title, now that I think of it. And I like watching like the Animal Planet channel, I'll admit it, because you never know when you're going to get something that's an inspiration for a poem. And one night they were talking about this animal called the naked mole rat. And I don't know if you're familiar with the naked mole rat, but he is ugly. He has no hair. He really is naked. And he is very sensitive to light and can't see very well. I'm like, this is a metaphor. Metaphor for human existence. So this is called Ode to the Naked Mole Rat. Ode to the naked mole rat. Hairless, nearly sightless, cold-blooded, buck-toothed rodent, roly-poly as sausage, you burrow 6 feet below an arid soil, sensitive to touch but impervious to pain, bereft of the chemical that gives skin the sting of acid, stark pain behind. Exhaling carbon dioxide in your cramped underground, you are the only animal that shows no response to such searing burn. Oxygen in such scant supply to you, scientists speculate you evolved nerve fibers with no verve, no capacity for pain that lasts. How I envy your dark havens, quiet anonymous lairs, where you feel your animal nothing. Almost useless eyes, beady slits, skin wrinkled as an elephant's, a coat of gray garbage bags. How many days have I wanted to tunnel deep where no one could find me, eyes tight against light, fat body waddling. The air that sustains you would kill me, but we are still mammal kin, vertebrates negotiating tunnels as if we know what we're doing, know what paths to pursue, despite our blindness and saggy skin, our fiercely ugly claws. Yeah, I ended up in the poem envying. It's like, at least you don't feel pain, buddy. You don't feel pain. You get to, sometimes you just want to be tunneled away from the world. It's like, go away. So like I said, I don't drive, and I'm often on public transportation, and there's often a poem that sort of just unfolds around me.